Tonight, we celebrate the restoration of our 1929 Charles Banks masterpiece golf course. We're going to be treated to what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion with Brian Schneider, our golf course architect, Mike Ballo, our head professional, hosted by our own member, Luke Kerr-Deneen.
Brian and Mike, thank you for being here on this really exciting night for the club and obviously for all the members within it. Brian, I wanted to start with just a little background on Charles Banks himself. You know, this is a name that I think a lot of avid golfers have heard. They see his name on the scorecard, but they may not necessarily know the intricacies of like what a Charles Banks design is. So when they're walking around Tamarack, when they're seeing some of these features, when should that cue go up for them to say this is something special, this is something that Banks left for us?
Thank you all for having me tonight and for having us involved in this project. It's been a sincere pleasure. Everyone who worked on the project, we've never been treated as well by a client as we've been at Tamarack. So that says a lot about the folks you all have in charge. To Chris, Rich, Sal, everyone here has gone above and beyond. So thank you all for that. To get to your question, Luke, so Charles Banks is a protege of one of the very best American golf architects, a fellow named C.B. McDonald, who's responsible for the National Golf Links on Long Island, along with a bunch of other great golf courses. Mr. McDonald himself had a very well-known protege named Seth Rayner, who's kind of enjoying his moment in the sun these days. Mr. Rayner designed a 9-hole golf course at the Hotchkiss School, which isn't too far up the road from here. At that time, Charles Banks was part of the staff at the school. You know, he worked at the school when Rayner was doing his thing, building this cool little 9-hole golf course. And by all accounts, Banks thought that was a pretty neat thing to watch and said, you know, I'm kind of done with this school thing. I want to do what you do. So Mr. Rayner took him on as a disciple. Rayner himself, unfortunately, passed away very young with a bunch of projects kind of halfway finished. So Charles Banks kind of picked up where he left off and got some work of his own and ended up, unfortunately, passed away even younger than Mr. Rayner was. So he had a very short career, but in a short amount of time kind of continued the legacy that McDonald had started and that Rayner had continued, which, you know, the one thing those fellas are all known for is something referred to as template holes. So C.B. McDonald, when he was a young kid, got to spend some time in Scotland in the late 1860s, I think it was. And he learned the game from old Tom Morris himself. So spent time in St. Andrews, learned the game from you know the folks that knew the most about it at that time. Came back to America 25 or 30 years later, really got into golf and realized that America didn't have any good golf courses. He was a big personality and was really well connected, and thought it was his personal mission to fix that. He wanted to kind of single-handedly raise the level of golf architecture in America. So the National Golf Links was essentially a collection of kind of replication is a strong word, but he played golf throughout the UK, Scotland, England, and saw a bunch of great golf holes over there and brought the ideas that he had seen in that part of the world back to the US and built kind of these templates, these replicas of the holes he'd seen over there and really liked. And when Mr. Rayner took over for McDonald, Rayner was not a golfer, but he knew what Mr. McDonald liked, and there were 18 or 20 or 22 template holes that McDonald had brought from the UK, and Rayner just built those over and over on every golf course he ever built. And Banks thought, well, that's pretty cool. I'll just do the same thing. He was a little looser with that, but a lot of the holes on your golf course are directly inspired by some great holes in the UK. The third hole is, it's called Eden. It's derived from the great 11th hole at St. Andrews. You've got a road hole out there, which a lot of golfers know from as the 17th at St. Andrews. So you've got a bunch of holes out there that are kind of directly inspired by the holes that Mr. McDonald thought were important to bring to America at the turn of the century to kind of raise the level of architecture in this country. That's probably the most distinctive thing. And the really deep, steep bunkers and the big, steep greens, those are all kind of a signature of Mr. Banks' style.
And when your first day on property at Tamarack, what were your first impressions of the place?
In my business, I tend to look at places as their potential. You see the potential in a golf course. And what I saw at Tamarack was a lot of untapped potential. At that point, you'd already started kind of managing the trees a bit, but there was still more of that to do, which Sal took care of pretty quickly. And I know there can be some hard feelings around that, but that is the first step in helping us accomplish what we did out there. And that's one of the most important steps in giving Jeff Scott and his team the tools that they need to do their jobs as well as they can. So anyone who has hard feelings about the tree removal, also recognize how fantastic that turf is. I mean, literally unrivaled in a part of the country that is loaded with great golf courses and resources. There's no better turf in this part of the country than that. So I saw the potential of the property, and I think Mike Geller was the first one to reach out to me. He gave me a phone call a while back. who immediately sicked Sal on me, and I don't remember the details really, but in my impression looking back is that Sal just told me that we were going to redo the golf course for y'all. I don't remember a whole lot of back and forth, but that's my recollection. So it was an exciting opportunity to help tap into some of that potential that's been lying out there for a really long time.
And Mike, you're a real rising star in this industry too. When you've seen Tamarack develop from afar through the years, and when we came calling, what made you want to be a part of the trajectory that this club's on too?
Yeah, when I found out that you guys were looking for a new head pro, I kind of took Sal's approach and kind of forced myself in the door kind of before anyone else could. Besides the logistics of it, where I grew up in Stanford and I wouldn't have to move and all those things, and then I started to learn about the club and what Brian was doing, and I had an opportunity to meet some of the people involved in the search and everything going on. I felt as though I was pretty fortunate. I was in a situation that I didn't necessarily need to jump at the first opportunity that was in front of me, but I played some golf with some members and spent some time with Sal and Doc and the search committee, and I got a chance to meet Chris, and then I came here. I had known Tamarack for years, and when I got here and I saw the trees were down, I go, I want to come. But no, I really always wanted to be in a situation with a membership who loves golf, loves their club. It's a family place, would let me bring my family into the fold and give me an opportunity to kind of have the same type of career that my father had, where he got in at a young time, and his kids had an opportunity to grow up there, and his wife worked there, and the family was part of the place. But at the same time, there was a world-class golf course outside the shop door every day. And so when things started coming to a pretty serious point, I did everything I could to get myself in the door, and I'm very happy to be here.
Based on how long Jeff and Brian Gillespie and a bunch of the staff have been here, you're locked in for about 3 decades, I think.
I'll sign that dotted line, man. It's just, I'm okay with that.
Which, that says a lot about this club, too. The fact that you've retained staff for a really long time not only says a lot about the staff you've taken the time to hire, but but the way you treat the staff, that they haven't been compelled to leave.
Brian, I agree. That was actually a big part for me is as this industry, as we go into the future, it's very rare that you see people in places for a long time like that. And I've had so many conversations with some of the guys sitting over here, and just kind of the way I grew up. It was so important that I found myself a chance to have that same opportunity and to get hired one time and retire from one place. And I think I found it here, and this is great.
So obviously it's been an off season of just incredible work from both of you, and obviously to Jeff Scott and his incredible team. So we just wanted to run through a few of the sort of key changes out there and derive a little insight about how best to navigate them. The first of which is, the first and second hole used to be two different fairways divided by trees and rough, and now it's polar opposite. It's a joined fairway with a little bit of mounding in the middle. It's the first thing I think everyone sees when they look out the balcony here. What was the motivation for bringing those two holes together the way you did?
I think it's important to make a great first impression, or the best first impression you can. And the situation of the clubhouse here on top of the hill with that view behind me, you want the golf course to get off to a good start. And, we knew that we were going to widen both holes and kind of restore a lot of the features that have been lost over the years, that restore the bunkering that had gone away. And by the time we got to widening both the first and the second holes, there was just a very narrow strip of rough left between them, to the point where the scale just felt off. It wasn't going to look right. So, kudos to Jeff. I mean, anytime you do work that turns out successfully, a huge part of that is a superintendent that never says, man, I don't know about that. Can you tone that down a little? Jeff didn't do that at all. And that's a great example. It's like, Jeff, how would you feel if we just connected these two fairways? And I think a couple hours later, he's like, all right, well, just paint that out, and I'll get a mower out here, and we'll start cutting that down. It was that quick. But he was always just, really eager to embrace the things that we wanted to do, which, someone in my position, and for Andre and Gray, the guys that worked with me out there, there's nothing more than we can ask for is a free hand to do the things that we think are best, and then to have somebody that, when you've been gone for a month and a half and you come back on a day like today, it gets better at a shocking rate. So, that was just a matter of there wasn't a whole lot of space left between those two holes, so let's join them together. And, as a result, you've got a pretty unique vista of just a bunch of short grass with some pretty severe stuff in between that you've got to kind of negotiate your way around over the first couple holes.
And Mike, I feel like that's quite indicative of what's happening here, right? Where there's a lot of width, there's a lot of angles that you can potentially navigate, to Brian's point there. How does that influence the strategy of the way, like, the rest of us should approach those holes and other holes like it out here?
I think that's one of the things that's so unique about Tamarack, especially for around here, is that every single hole and what Brian's done, it provides options. It plays differently and so well for the guys who are playing from the back and the people that are playing all the way from the front. It plays differently, but at the same time, where you can play short of bunkers, you can try to carry some bunkers. Creating angles into the green is so important because it's somewhat forgiving fairways, which is great, and that's fine. But for instance, on the first hole, if the pin's in the back right and you find yourself in the right side of the fairway, you've just made the hole significantly harder for yourself. So as not daunting as it may look compared to some other places that are tree lined and all those things, the positioning off the tee is so important to set yourself up for your approach shot. And that's true for all levels. At a scratch golfer level or professional level, you have to think from where the pin is backwards. And that's one of the things that, like, the tour pros do, that's a very high level thing, is that when they get to a tee box and it's not an automatic driver teed up and just smack it, You know, they look at their pin sheet, they understand where the pin is, they understand what side of the fairway is the easiest to play from, giving themselves the best opportunity to make pars and birdies, and even further than that, you know, set themselves up to not make double bogeys. What Brian did is so amazing is that every single hole has different approaches to it, given on where the pins are, which, you know, we have like, what, the 5th biggest greens in the country or something like that. So you can play one hole 10 times with 10 different pins and play it 10 different ways. And that is so unique for this area, and one of those kind of untapped things that I think Brian found for us, which is just incredible.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because when the trees are up, right, it picks your target for you in many ways. When you look at these wider courses like we have out here, you start seeing pros picking different lanes based on where the pin is working backwards. It's such a good point. And to that effect, I guess I wanted to, Brian, ask you about two of some of the most transformative changes out there, the 4th hole, the bottle hole, and the 16th hole, which the work done there again, Jeff, it's incredible stuff. So I guess I just wanted to ask you what your goals were when you set about trying to transform and upgrade those 2 holes in particular.
Yeah, I'm probably getting too much credit for a lot of what happened out there, because, you know, in reality, most of the golf holes as they are today is essentially how Charles Banks himself laid them out. You know, we were putting back stuff that he'd built 100 years ago, and I don't deserve any credit for that. We just got to do the work. That being said, there were a few holes where we went a little off script. The 4th being one of those. You know, that all of your holes have names, and the name of the 4th hole is Bottle, which is based in large part on the great 12th hole at the old course at Sunningdale in England. And, you know, to McDonald and Rayner and Banks, the most important feature of that hole is kind of a line of bunkers that cuts through the center of it, separating a right half from a left half, and you stay on the tee. If you want to hit a really long tee ball, there's going to be some stuff in your way, and you've got to decide, do I carry that? Do I go left? Do I go right? What do I do? And that hole's had the name Bottle for 90 years, and it's never offered that challenge. You know, it's always been a difficult hole because it's long. And, you know, that's one of the lower holes in the golf course, so that fairway tends to stay a little wet. But it's always played really long, but never really had much to do. You know, you just hit it as far as you could twice and hope that got you on or near the green, and try to make a putt and get away with a par. But the idea there was just to better enable that hole to reflect its namesake, so that it actually felt like a bottle hole. So that's where the idea of the center line bunkers came from. And they're going to drive you all nuts, because, you know, if you want to get to that green in 2, you've got to hit it far enough off the tee where you're going to interact with that stuff. So, you know, that hole's not any easier, but hopefully it's more interesting and more fun, and will take you all a little while to figure out. The 16th is a little different. You know, going back to my first impression of the golf course, when I got to 16, after seeing a bunch of really dramatic features and really exciting golf holes, got to 16 and said, well, this one's kind of plain. Largely because the green was really low and the bunkers are really shallow, and it's a short hole, but the green was big, and you really couldn't get yourself in too much trouble around the green. And for a hole of that length, you know, it's potentially drivable. I've heard some people say that they've driven it awfully close to that green. Maybe you have. You know, in my thought, if you're going to build a hole that short, there's got to be something up there that makes you think about just smashing driver at the green. And I think raising the green 4 or 5 feet probably accomplished that. To the point where now I think that's a hole that, you know, is probably a little bit scary, but hopefully makes you think off the tee. You know, how aggressive do I want to be? Obviously, there's a new bunker up the right-hand side and some mounding on the left. There's a lot of stuff to think about now. But hopefully that hole has become more interesting, and one of the holes that I thought was kind of an outlier, that it just didn't really offer it the boldness that the rest of the golf course presented.
And Mike, you obviously have been around so many good players. You are an incredible player yourself, and I feel like the 2 things that really scare really top players are wind, when the wind gets cooking, and when the course just gets cooked. You know, those are the 2 alarm bells is when they start going off. And I feel like the changes here sort of lend itself to that happening, but in some ways, that makes it more playable for a certain sector of golfers, while also more challenging for this other sector. So I'm just wondering if you could explain why that's sort of the case.
Yeah, it's interesting because most people think the only thing that makes golf hard is length, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Just as a prime example, when they played the U.S. Open at Marion, one of the shortest courses they've played in a major in the last 20 years, over par was the winner, the best players in the world. So I'll tell you from experience, the only thing that makes golf hard are firm, fast greens, long rough, and weather conditions. And we got all three, right? What Brian did was really bring those elements into play. So for the more of the elite player who's playing the tips, all the bunkers on every tee shot are in play. You know, every potential disaster is looming if you make a bad decision. For someone who is out there trying to have fun and hit it down the fairway with firm, fast conditions, there's more than enough space and more of enough opportunity to avoid the fairway bunkers, get yourself into a position around the greens where there's an opening that you can putt it on, chip it on, use your hybrid. There's a million different things that you can do. And Brian really brought that out. And especially now with the trees gone, the wind whips all the time. And that makes golf really hard. It makes it really difficult to control your distances, control your ball flight. For the elite player, where actually it doesn't hinder a higher handicap as much as it would a lower handicap, because the higher handicap doesn't hit it as high, doesn't generate as much spin, all of those things. The work that Brian has done has made the golf course much harder for the elite player and much more playable for the non-elite player. And that is so unique, so unique.
Yeah, exactly, because the mid and higher handicaps among us, they love being able to run something back up into a pin, onto a green. They can take the extra roll, whereas a player like you is throwing darts, but you can't throw darts when
there is no dart throwing here. No dart throwing. And what Brian said about 16, what he did was take by far the least interesting hole on the whole property and made it arguably one of the most interesting holes on the whole property. And it's just unbelievable how different, because I remember playing here, 5-6 years ago in an event, and when you get ready for these events, you kind of think ahead and you know that like you have a few spots on a golf course that you consider to be a break, where you can kind of turn your brain off a little bit, you tee the ball up, you hit it as far as you can, you go get it, you try to hit it as close as you can, you move on to the next hole. There's no break here. There's no break. And it's amazing. It's an elite golf course.
And Brian, I wanted to ask you about Tamarack's par threes, because I feel like even the best courses around are sort of defined by their par threes. I feel like that's especially true at Tamarack with only 2 par fives. I'm wondering if you could just speak to some of the changes you undertook with the par threes themselves, and what, as a membership, we should know about those holes in particular.
So going back to McDonald and Rayner and Banks, the set of par threes is something they were known for. Essentially they built the same 4 par threes on every golf course they ever did, with a few exceptions. But there's the third hole, which I mentioned earlier, is a version of the 11th at St. Andrews called the Eden. The 7th, the great 7th, is based after the 15th hole at a place called North Berwick in Scotland. It's called the Redan, probably the most famous and copied par 3 in golf. The stunningly dramatic 12th is named Biarritz after a golf course in France. Mr. McDonald took an idea from what was a par 4 in Biarritz, France, and adapted that to a par 3. And then the 15th is the short hole, which is kind of loosely based on a hole at a place called Brancaster in England. Your Eden, your third hole, and your 12th hole, your Biarritz, are 2 of the most extreme versions of either of those holes in the world. I mean, you don't need to miss those greens more than once to realize you've screwed up. But unfortunately, it's really hard to avoid that. They're both really difficult holes. But they're really unique and compelling examples of the templates that Mr. McDonald originally thought were really important to bring to the States. And there were some big changes to the 12th, big, primarily meaning that massive bunker on the right side of the hole, which for those of you taking carts, you'll be able to drive your golf cart right through now. And the third, the changes to the third were fairly subtle. The changes to the Redan, the 7th, are pretty dramatic. And primarily getting that horrific cart path out of the way so that we could expand the fairway out to the right. And the idea behind the Redan hole is, okay, taking the cart path out means you all need to walk more. The idea behind the Redan hole is that, you don't necessarily have to fly the ball onto the green. You can play it out to the right-hand side with a draw, and the slope of the land brings you in there. But a year ago, most of that space was rough or asphalt. So getting the cart path out of the way allowed us to push the fairway out to the right. So now that shot is an option again. So rather than aiming directly at the flag, you could aim 25 yards to the right and use the slope of the ground and the short grass to feed you into the hole and play what's a really fun shot to watch. I think golf is at its best. The longer that the ball is moving, the more engaged you are with the shot you just hit, and the more fun golf can be. And not only does that tie into the slope of the ground doing neat things with the ball, but the firm conditions and the kind of the great course presentation that Jeff and his staff provide. The ball's going to roll around out there more than it did before, and the 7th is a great example of that.
And I guess just finally to close, to both of you, what as a membership should we be grateful for sort of today, and what should we be as a club aspiring to tomorrow, with what we have out here at Tamarack?
You can start.
I think we find ourselves in this point in history with Tamarack is that, which is different than most places. It's a lot different than places I've worked, in the sense of we have a golf course that for the people who want to be competitive and want to get better and want to play in events and want to try to shoot the course right and all those things, it's one of the most challenging courses that you can play in this section. And then there's you who want to go out there and play the front tees and have fun and bring beers. And it's a fun, interesting experience. So we have all the spectrums of the membership experience covered based on what Brian did to the golf course. What we have now, an opportunity as a membership, is to respect that, cultivate it, create a new culture around it, love every aspect of it, and do our best to move into the future in that way.
I already alluded to something that you all should be really proud of, and that's the wonderful hospitality you've shown your guests over the past 8 or 9 months. I mean, we got to spend a lot of time here during this project, and you all should be really proud, and we're very appreciative of the way we were treated while we were here. So thank you. Continue to embrace that. And as far as the golf course goes, one of the major focuses of this work was to embrace all of the things that make that golf course different than every other golf course around here. You've got some illustrious neighbors. There's a lot of great golf courses in this area. And we were trying really hard to showcase the things that make this different than all those, and hopefully you all celebrate that and enjoy what makes your place different than the other clubs in this area and the other golf courses in this area. So.